Thank you very much, Steve. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to be back in Grand Rapids. We pulled up in front of the hotel a little while ago, and I have one of our young staffers with us, and I said, the first time I pulled up in front of this hotel, it was called the Pantlin. And the only thing I remember about it, having stayed here, it sold the best sticky buns in America. I don't know whether you still got the sticky buns, but it's a lot better hotel. So thank you very much, Steve. I'm honored to be here. I was asked by a couple of people, do you come to Grand Rapids a lot? And I said, whenever I can, for lots of reasons, for lots of friends, and it's a pleasure to be here. It's also, I'm very pleased to speak at this very prestigious forum. It's interesting to look at the quality of the people that you attract here, and I want to thank Lorna for inviting me and for making this possible. I also like to welcome all of the U.S. Chamber members, there should be more, and partners here today, including Rick Studley from the Michigan State Chamber and Rick Barker from the Grand Rapids Chamber. Thanks for your support. And there were a lot of others here, and anybody that runs a chamber or is on a chamber board, just stick your hand up. That's the idea. Good. We need some more of them, too. Now, I want to especially recognize my friends Steve Van Andel and Amy. Steve, along with his dad, Jay, was one of two father-son combos that served as the chairman of the chamber. The other is the current chairman of the board of State Farm. And his father, a long time before, wasn't the chairman, but he was then the president, because the president used to be the volunteer leader. And that was very, very helpful when I got him to come and be chairman when I needed him. The other thing is, Steve is only one of two people in the 102-year existence of the chamber that served as our chairman more than once. People ask me, why did that happen? And I said, because I said so. Seemed to work for me, and we needed him. Now, given the tremendous expansion of Amway's business overseas in recent years, it's no surprise that Steve has focused his chairmanship with the chamber on expanding exporting opportunities for American goods and services around the world. As Steve likes to tell it, we're creating good-paying jobs here by selling our stuff there. In fact, Amway's sales, the great preponderance of them, some people say up to 90%, are outside the United States. Or let me put it another way. Without trade, a good portion of the people that work for Amway here would have to find another job. So we're all for trade. That's true all over Michigan. And so that's at the heart of what I want to talk about today. Creating jobs, growth, and opportunity by opening more markets to American-made products and services around the world. Many ask, why focus on trade when there are so many other pressing issues facing the business community in our country? It's simple. Dramatically increasing America's exports is one of the best opportunities we have to create jobs, spur growth, and reassert America's leadership around the world. You know, exports have been one of the rare bright spots in America's economy of recent times. They've risen by more than 50% over the last 5 years. More than 38 million American jobs depend on trade. And yet we're only scratching the surface. More than 95% of the people we want to sell things to live outside our borders. We have negotiated 14 market opening agreements covering only 20 countries. Opportunities abound. If we don't seize these opportunities, our competitors will. In fact, they already have. According to the World Trade Organization, there are 398 trade agreements in force around the globe today. The United States is only part of 3% of them. Here's another reason to focus on trade. We have the most aggressive export agenda in recent memory, including deals that would open markets in dynamic Asian-Pacific regions and expand our commercial relationship in Europe. Approving these agreements right now would put hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Americans back to work, jumpstart our economy beyond where it is, and restore America, as I said, as a global leader. But I have news for you. The bipartisan consensus in support of trade that we've enjoyed for decades in this country is somewhat frayed. More members from the extreme ends of both political parties, underline that, both political parties, are being elected to Congress, and they tend to oppose trade deals. I was doing an interview before, and somebody said, "Why is that happening in Washington?" And I said, well, you have to understand, in Washington, nobody is allowed to look at the facts. If you look at the facts, you louse up a good political argument. And our job is to get folks to look at the facts. Our opponents have stepped up their game and raised their voices in the public debate. We can no longer take for granted widespread support for trade among the public and lawmakers. We have to fight to win that support. The good news is all of our polls say they're willing to listen. They can be convinced. We just have to make the case. We need to change the misconceptions surrounding this issue. We need to make a smart, fact-based case for opening new markets and leveling the playing field for America's products through our trade agreements. We need to explain the broad-based benefits of increasing exports to all Americans. We need to recognize that sometimes our opponents have a fair point, that trade can cause disruption, but we can't stand still. If we want to win the debate on trade and advance our agenda, here are some of the arguments that we have to make. The single most important message is this: our trade agreements must ensure accountability, fairness, and a level playing field for American companies and American workers. Both trade supporters and opponents agree on one thing. Right now, the playing field isn't always level, nor are all the rules fair, and some are stacked against American workers and businesses. We have to fix that. So what's the smart way to fix it? It is to is it to erect more barriers of our own? The Buy American system? I just put that in there. They wanted me to keep it out, but I decided to put it in there. That's a dumb idea, because if you set up those obstructions, everybody is going to set up obstructions to what we want to sell around the world. Is it to lower barriers abroad through trade agreements in a win-win proposition? Of course. In my book, win-win beats lose-lose every day of the week. Trade agreements achieve exactly what trade opponents say they want. They level the playing field for American workers and businesses by cutting tariffs and other barriers to U.S. exports. If we don't negotiate agreements, then we lock in the status quo. We lock in our competitive disadvantage. If trade opponents are saying that Americans can't compete and win on a level playing field, we strongly, strongly disagree. We believe they can, they do, and they will. Now, trade skeptics demand that America only enter into agreements that are based on accountability and fairness. Well, guess what? I agree with that. The trade agreements being negotiated today do a better job than we did in the past of ensuring openness, accountability, and a level playing field for all. Make no mistake, enforcement is vital. The trade agreements we sign aren't worth the paper that they're written on if we don't enforce to a certain degree. Today's agreements are clear about what parties are expected to do. They contain methods to ensure enforcement and fairly resolve disputes. This is the principal rationale for trade agreements: to generate economic growth, new exports, and good jobs through the elimination of trade barriers, and to do so in a way that's fundamentally fair. Earlier, I mentioned that we need to stick to the facts when we're making our case for more American exports. So what do the facts tell us about America's trade agreements? The facts say that these agreements have succeeded in creating new jobs, bolstering economic growth, and facilitating cross-border trade. While our 20 trade agreement partners represent just 6% of the world's population, they buy nearly half of our total exports. We even have a trade surplus with all of these countries. American workers are among the biggest winners. Commerce with our trade agreement partners supports more than 17 million jobs. Small businesses, farmers, manufacturers, and service industries have also greatly benefited. Small and medium-sized companies, listen, account for 98% of all the U.S. exports. 40% of their merchandise exports go to our trade agreement partners. That spells success for America's small businesses. Now, exports of U.S. farm and food products, very important, to our trade agreement partners increased by more than 130% between 2003 and 2013, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and I always believe them when I agree with them. Now, American manufacturers sold $658 billion in products to our 20 trade agreement partners in 2013. The total amount American manufacturers sold overseas was $1,450 billion worth of goods. The facts are clear. America's trade agreements have been an impressive start, an impressive success. Even in light of these facts, many trade opponents still argue that trade and imports in particular cost jobs and have decimated the manufacturing industry. They maintain that nothing is being done to help those workers who really are displaced by trade. Well, how should we respond to that? Let's look at jobs. Trade skeptics claim that NAFTA has cost factory jobs. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, those, I agree with them this time, they disagree. In fact, the net increase, there was a net increase of 800,000 jobs in the U.S. manufacturing alone during the first 4 years of our trade agreement with Canada and Mexico. Critics are telling us something we already know when they say Americans are losing manufacturing jobs, as we saw in the recent recession. Let me say that again. Critics are telling us something we already know. America is losing manufacturing jobs. But they're dead wrong to place the blame on trade. Survey data from the federal government consistently show that less than 1% of the layoffs are attributed to offshoring. Where have the lost manufacturing jobs gone? Not to Mexico, not to China. A RAND study found that China shed 25 million manufacturing jobs themselves between 1994 and 2004, 10 times more than the United States lost in the same period. But the fact is that over the last, we'll take a number, 10 years, American business has taken about 40% of the jobs out of the manufacturing process. They're gone. Goodbye. They're not coming back. Why? Because of the use of information technology and robotics and process engineering and supply chain management. So what we have now are different, more efficient institutions. Most of these jobs have been lost to a country called productivity, and it's going to continue. So, to create more manufacturing jobs, we need more manufacturing. And by the way, to run those companies, we need different kind of workers. So here's our problem. We have people without jobs, and we have jobs without people. Because to run these new companies takes people with greater background, skill, and education. And that was for another speech. I'll come back and talk to you about our education system. Technological change, automation, is so widespread that this is going to continue to cause companies to cut payrolls. More recently, U.S. manufacturers, by the way, have enjoyed a steady growth thanks to a large part to the increases in our trade arrangements. Therefore, they can hire more people to do what they're doing in their new companies that require different types of skills. We're also helping ourselves because of the price of energy. Forget that the cost went down for a minute. It's the availability of energy. And at whatever cost the world cost ends up at, it's 25% of what it would cost you in Europe. So right now, today, I'll bet you there's 24 European countries and their business leaders walking around America trying to figure out where they're going to put their factories to run their modern manufacturing systems because of productive workers, if they can get enough, and because of the price of energy. Similarly, trade opponents argue that imports are hurting our economy, and the facts there tell a different story. Imports bring lower prices, we were just talking about this at lunch, and more choices to families striving to make ends meet, as well as exciting new technologies that make our lives better. Access to imports boosts the purchasing power of the average American family, which means that they can maintain their household at about $10,000 less of what it would cost us if we didn't have access to those products. Imports of immediate goods, intermediate goods, and raw materials help lower the cost for manufacturers and other businesses, which can pass on the savings to consumers. While trade opponents generally exaggerate job losses due to trade, it's true that some workers are displaced by the changes in the economy and technology, in consumer preferences, in the competitive landscape in a global economy. Again, critics also often lay the blame all on trade, and they're just plain wrong. Regardless of where the blame lies, we have a responsibility to do more to help displaced workers. But the answer to a worker losing his job at a typewriter factory is not to force the factory to keep making typewriters. It's to make sure that a worker can move from a 20th century job to a 21st century job without turning his or her life upside down. Although the fact that most displaced workers have a hesitancy, and you can understand this, to move, even though there are jobs in many places around this country, it's very hard to get them to do it. But the answer to a worker losing his job is to look to what business is already doing to contribute to training and location of jobs for displaced workers. The American Society for Training and Development estimates that U.S. businesses spent $164 billion on employee learning and development in 2012 alone, about $1,200 per employee. There's more that can be done. Government and business have to work together to ensure that any worker displaced by trade can be retrained for another good job. Armed with all these facts, remember, here in Grand Rapids, facts make a difference. And so we're going to have to get the votes in Grand Rapids and the Grand Rapids all around the country, because facts don't make enough difference in Washington. But armed with these facts, we can help advance a bold trade agenda that's going to create jobs, growth, and opportunity for our workers and for businesses. We should start by bringing several trade negotiations to a successful conclusion. The Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement would open the Asian-Pacific dynamic markets to American goods and services. It's critical that we do so because nations across the Pacific are clinching their own trade agreements that exclude the United States, denying American exporters access to those markets. TPP, as we call it, gives the United States a strong hand in writing the rules for trade for this important region. It makes us an active player, very important, not a bystander stuck on the outside looking in. TPP would affirm and deepen America's ties to Asia at a time when there is a perception that we are pulling back. There is also, and this is very important, and if you're catching a little nap, just wake up for a minute. There is also an agreement being negotiated called the Trans-Pacific Trade and Investment Partnership, which would further remove barriers between the United States and Europe. The agreement could not come at a better time. Both the American and European economy are struggling. Aging populations and new competition from emerging nations are taking their toll. It's important to understand that while our largest trading partners, Canada and then Mexico, in terms of exporting, our economy is like 17 trillion, Europe's like 16 trillion, and they're our largest exporter. And don't tell everybody, but their economy is really in trouble. And this trade deal would help ours get stronger and theirs get going, and this would be very important. Now, the people that hear me say that, I'll hear from a lot of them and say, thank you for encouraging it, but we're really not in that much trouble. I said, that's your opinion, you're entitled to it, but I like the facts. TPP would be a welcome economic boost to both sides of the pond. How big a boost? Think about this. A relationship as huge as these two great parts of the world would, according to the Atlantic Council and the British Embassy in a trade deal they did, study, would create 740,000 jobs in the United States. That's a lot of people that like to go to work. The Trade in Services Agreement, this is a little sidebar agreement, is another big opportunity. It's a free trade zone for services for 50 countries around the globe. And we're very excited that this gets done. So there's 3 agreements. Eliminating barriers to trade and services would create as many as 3 million new jobs in the United States. We're putting all these people to work. You know, the chamber ought to get a cut of this deal. Now, while these trade pacts can't solve all of our economic problems, they can help spur growth, create jobs, ensure positive American engagement in global affairs. There's one other agreement. By the way, it doesn't involve anybody selling anything. There's a trade facilitation agreement that we just got finished, which makes it simpler, cheaper, and more reasonable to move your products around the world. And that doesn't need a vote, so that's going to happen in a big hurry. So that's why the Chamber has been an ardent supporter of these agreements from the very beginning, why we have been at every major negotiating session on all of these agreements, and why we're working to ensure accountability, fairness, strong intellectual property protections, and a level playing field. But we can't stop there. We need a final trade agreement, and it's called the Trade Promotion Authority. Every president since Jerry Ford or Harry Truman or somebody back there has had trade promotion authority. This president hasn't wanted it, but now he does, because in his second term he's committed to moving these agreements. There's been a lot of misinformation and controversy around this TPA, so let's clear up what are the facts. TPA is based on the radical notion that Congress and the White House should work together on trade. It is especially important to strengthen the voice of Congress on trade from my perspective. TPA allows the Congress to set negotiating objectives. It requires the executive branch to consult closely with the Congress during the talks. Finally, TPA reserves for Congress the final vote on any new trade agreement in the form of an up or down vote. You can't change it. Now, why would everybody want that agreement around the world, and why would they not negotiate a deal with you if the president didn't have it? I want you to think about this. There are 435 members of the Congress and 100 members of the Senate. That's 535 politicians rewriting every trade agreement that ever came up to the Hill. It'll never happen. We need TPA. And anybody that asks you, tell them if we don't do it, we don't get any of the things I've been talking about. What it doesn't give the president, because a lot of people are worried about him, I think this will work very well. It doesn't give the president unlimited power, as some have suggested. In fact, it ensures an appropriate balance between the executive and legislative branches of government. Now, we could use a lot more of that balance these days. TPA has been a key part of U.S. trade diplomacy since 1934. We need to get on with it now. The bottom line is you can't be pro-trade and be anti-TPA. Now, I'm going to hit two quick things, and then if the chairman will yield me any time, I'll answer any question you have. I have a special system that I made up at the chamber. I either know the answer or I'll hasten to make it up. And so there's one more thing we need to do, and that is to help exporters and their products overseas. We need to pass a long-term extension of the Ex-Im Bank deal. And everybody is complaining. It sort of seems that the far right and the far left at the same time are against this for some reason. So let me try the facts. And we put a short renewal on it 9 months ago. The Ex-Im Bank is a small federal agency that enables U.S. companies to sell their products into global markets. 90% of their loans go to small businesses. That's good. The bank even turns a profit. That's very hard to believe, but since 1990, the Ex-Im Bank has returned a net of $7 billion to the Treasury. Defaults are rare, and loans are backed by the borrower's collateral, meaning no taxpayer bailouts. Ex-Im Bank also helps level the playing field for American companies. Failure to reauthorize Ex-Im over the long term amounts to unilateral disarmament, because 60 other countries have a similar bank for a similar purpose. And if we don't deal with this issue, then we're the dumb people. Now, I'm going to conclude. We work every day to build bridges to promising markets around the world, to tear down barriers that shut U.S. exports out of foreign markets, and to secure a brighter future where American exports generate economic growth and job creation at home. We're conducting a comprehensive nationwide campaign to renew trade promotion authority, to successfully negotiate these trade pacts, and to authorize a long-term extension of the Ex-Im Bank. This campaign includes a coordinated and targeted lobbying effort aimed at key members of the Congress who can tilt their votes in our favor if you ask them to. Our National Federation of State and Local Chambers, thank you all for being here, of Commerce, industry associations, and small and medium-sized businesses play a key role here. We will soon update our trade supports job website. We're sort of upgrading it right now. Keep an eye out for it. But we have a difficult task ahead, and we could use your support. Few areas of the country rely more on American exports than Michigan. Trade already supports 1.2 million Michigan jobs, and the state's exports rose by more than 70% in the last 5 years. Right here in Grand Rapids, more than 130 companies in the area are exporting $6.8 billion in goods and services all over the world. It's also home to a company that epitomizes the power of exports and international engagement, Amway. So there's a lot at stake for members of this community and of this state. In the final analysis, we can't turn our back on world trade. America must engage with the world, not shrink from it. We can't stand still. Trade plays to the American strength, our innovation, our competitiveness, and most of all, our people. We need to do all we can to make the case for more American exports. We need to reframe the debate and get the facts out. We need to acknowledge and address the legitimate points raised by the opponents, and we need to make sure that the fruits of more American exports are enjoyed by all of our workers and their families. If we negotiate trade agreements that are in keeping with our values of innovation, hard work, fairness, and doing what's right, trade can be America's next great success story. So thank you for your extraordinary patience, for hearing me out today on this subject, because we're now going to take this speech and use it all over the place and get other people to go out and give it and see if we can raise a little more smoke and maybe a little fire. Thank you very much.